So let's look at one other type here. Look at molecular compounds and how to write the chemical names and the formulas for a molecular compound. Now, if you remember, a molecular compound, sometimes known as a covalent compound, means the same thing, is a compound between two nonmetals, two atoms that are nonmetals that share a bond. And if you remember, the nonmetals are all negative. Now, molecular compounds are different because the atoms combine in a different ratio. They don't balance the charges. Because we have all negatives, there's no balancing of charges. So if we combine something like nitrogen and oxygen, it could combine as NO, N2O, or NO2. There's no balancing of charges. So what we do then is the chemical formula for the molecular compounds comes from their names, the actual word names. And they're based on what we call a prefix system. And this prefix system involves the prefixes that you actually have in your data booklet. And if you turn to page 5 in your data booklet, you will see all these prefixes that we are going to use throughout our naming of molecular compounds. So we need to keep that data booklet page 5 as well as our periodic table to start naming some of these molecular compounds. So if we were trying to write formulas, the prefix tells us how many of each atom are available. So if you were given the name, the prefixes are actually going to relate to the number of each atom. And if we are trying to write the name of a chemical formula, we need to add a prefix according to the subscript in the formula. And we're going to do a couple examples to make that clear. The one exception to this is if we have a compound that only has one first element, we are not going to use mono. And that's going to become clear as we do an example. And let's look at one that you're probably familiar with, a formula that you will likely have seen before, CO2. And you probably already know the name of this chemical formula, but let's figure out the name according to our naming conventions. Well, first of all, if we look on our periodic table, carbon and oxygen are both non-metals, and they combine together, and this has a 2 in the oxygen. Now that 2 corresponds to our prefix di. So if we're doing our name, we start with the first element, followed by our second element with our prefix di. And keeping in mind, we do change to IDE, we have the name carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide. So let's try another. What if we have carbon and oxygen in this form, CO? Well, in this case, we have carbon monoxide. Mono, because there's only one oxygen molecule. Now, this is where this omitting comes into play. Notice we have one carbon, one oxygen. We do not put mono at the start of carbon. It is just carbon monoxide. Well, let's try another. P2O5. Well, we turn to our periodic table, find P, find O, put our prefixes in, and this means we have diphosphorus pentoxide. And notice that we drop the A in penta because we have a vowel from oxide there and write it pentoxide. So let's try this if we have the name and we're trying to write the formula. Silicon tetrabromide. Again, periodic table. We find silicone on the periodic table. There it is right there. Bromide is Br right there. And if we have the name, now we can work backwards to write the formula. The tetra tells us we have 4 bromide, and our chemical formula then is SiBr4, silicone tetrabromide. Well, what about sulfur hexafluoride? fluoride. And what I want you to try and do is try and do this on your own and come back and see if you got the right answer. Well, sulfur hexafluoride. Sulfur, periodic table is S, fluoride is F, hexa tells us we have 6, so the chemical formula would be SF6. Well, there are some molecular compounds that actually have common names that are more often used. So not their actual chemical name, but more typical common names. And some of these common names you may have heard before. First one, if we look at this, carbon tetrahydride. Carbon tetrahydride. Well, carbon obviously is C. Hydride tells us we are hydrogen. Tetra from the prefix, that means we have CH4, and you may have heard of CH4 before. This is methane. How about nitrogen trihydride? Again, there's that hydride again, hydrogen tri 3, nitrogen N, NH3, and NH3, nitrogen tetrahydride, more commonly goes by its common name of ammonia. And there's one last one we're going to look at, dihydrogen monoxide. Di telling us 2 hydrogen, monoxide telling us 1 oxygen. Well, you probably already know what this is. 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen is H2O, more commonly known as water. And that's how we name molecular compounds.